Welcome to Thorncrown, an audio-visual book, written by Brian M. Brumbaugh, read by Gwyneth Paltrow. Chapter 1, The Death of Order. The wind over Solmire Keep howled like a wounded beast. It clawed through the narrow stone corridors and rattled the banners that still bore the Solmire crest, a white sun split in two by a black spear. The light that filtered through the stained-glass windows of the great hall was dim and cold, broken by frost and centuries-old dust. Every corner of the keep seemed to whisper the same word, end. The throne sat empty, not merely unoccupied, but abandoned. The ironwood seat carved with ancient runes stood like a gravestone at the head of the hall, its frame untouched since the morning Lord Theron Solmire was found dead in his solar. High Steward Merritt Crane stood before it now, the folds of his dark robe pooling like shadow around his feet. His voice echoed through the chamber, sharp and deliberate. "Let it be known to all assembled," Crane intoned, "that Theron Solmire, Warden of the Heartlands and Protector of the Realm, has passed beyond the veil. May the gods watch over his soul, though his body lies cold in the crypt beneath us." No cries of mourning rose in reply. Only the shifting of boots, the quiet rustle of silken mail. The lords of Vailrath had not come to weep, they had come to feast. At the front stood the 5 great houses. Each had claimed a place of power after centuries of blood and oath-breaking, their histories woven into the scars of the kingdom itself. House Duskmore, ruled by Lady Visara, had once been a noble line of judges and stewards. They turned to shadows in the age of shattered crowns, becoming masters of whispers and secrets. Visara's line was infamous for poisoning their way through court, toppling 5 minor lords through blackmail alone. Her robes, embroidered with dagger-shaped silver, were as much warning as decoration. She wore grief like armor and smiled only when others flinched. House Blackthorn had held the north since the time of the Frost Pact. Brannock Blackthorn, its current lord, was born on a battlefield and named after the tree under which his mother bled out. A veteran of 3 civil wars, he spoke little, preferring action to politics. His bastard son Rygar shadowed him always, never speaking, never smiling, but always watching with eyes too old for their years. House Ironvale, proud and ostentatious, controlled the eastern forges and trade routes. Duke Harrow wore his wealth like a second skin, gold filigree on his armor, ruby rings, a cloak of fine crimson velvet lined with fox fur, but beneath the pageantry was a calculating mind. Ironvale blades had armed half the realm, and Harrow's coffers were deep enough to drown a crown in coin. House Vyre of the West, liars, spies, diplomats, and thieves. Mistress Lyria Vyre was the latest in a long line of manipulators. Her estate had once been a prison. Her family's castle, Vyrehold, was famed for its labyrinthine halls and rumor-fed cells. She spoke softly, smiled easily, and never answered a question directly. And then there was House Solmire, or what remained of it. Kael Solmire, the bastard's son, born of a servant girl who vanished under curious circumstances before his 5th winter, raised in the keep by Theron Solmire himself. Trained in sword and scroll both, but never legitimized. The people knew him, the soldiers followed him, the lords ignored him, until now. Kael stood at the back of the chamber, cloaked in gray, his face a study in stillness. He had inherited none of the pageantry of his father, only his eyes, dark, sharp, unflinching. Crane cleared his throat and continued. "There remains, as yet, no clear heir to Lord Theron's seat. The Council of Lords has convened to discuss succession." The silence that followed was not empty. It was brimming with threat. Lady Visara stepped forward first. "Then let us speak plainly," she said. "There is a bastard in this hall, a shadow raised beneath the Solmire roof, trained by Solmire's own hand, whispered about in villages, touted by drunk soldiers. But no crown rests on his brow." Kael met her gaze without flinching. Duke Harrow chuckled. "And yet the late lord never signed a writ. No seal, no bloodline, no claim." Mistress Vyre raised an eyebrow. "But enough noise to start a rebellion." Crane lifted a parchment. "In his final months, Lord Theron dictated this letter. It names Kael Solmire as his successor, not by blood, but by deed. It is witnessed, but unsigned." Kael stepped forward. "Then it is worthless." Crane's expression did not shift. Not to the people, not to the soldiers who marched with you at Frostbridge, not to the merchants whose roads you kept clear, not to those who remember that when the lords fell silent, it was you who answered. Kael looked across the room. I want no crown. Lady Duskmore's smile was pure ice, pity. It wants you. That night, Kael's name echoed through Solmire, keep like the wail of a dying beast, not in praise, in accusation. 3 members of the Thornwatch were found dead in the stables. Throats slit, eyes open, blades still sheathed. No struggle, no sign of warning. Their blood soaked into the straw like spilled wine. Kael stood over the bodies, fists clenched at his sides. Sir Aemon Pell arrived minutes later. An old companion, once his sparring partner, now a knight in charge of the keep's perimeter guard. His hair had gone white too early, and a long scar split his upper lip. They're saying you did it, Aemon said. That it's your opening move. Kael's jaw tightened. This was Vire, surgical, silent. No message, just a threat. Even so, it'll spread. The lords won't wait for proof. I won't give them proof, Kael replied. I'll give them presents. He rose, blood on his boots. Let them see I'm not hiding. The gathering of banners turned the hills below Solmire into a sea of color and steel. Flags snapped in the wind. Fires blazed at night. Some came to pledge. Most came to watch. Kael stood at the center of it all, wearing blackened steel and a cloak the color of storm clouds. He wore no crown, no sigil. Just a blade slung across his back and the weight of every eye on him. Crane read the letter. The lords responded. Duskmore, illegitimate, uncrowned. Ironvale, untrained in politics, too raw, too dangerous. Vire, a soldier's puppet. Crane's mouthpiece. Blackthorn said nothing. Kael raised a hand. I watched you weep at the death of a man you hated, just long enough for the ink on your next betrayal to dry. You do not want a ruler, you want a mask. I will not wear it. He turned, cloak swirling. I will not be your king, but I will be your consequence. By dawn, smoke rose from the west. Virehold burned. No banner flew over its broken towers, except one, a black wolf wreathed in thorns. Kael had made his claim, not by counsel, but by fire. Chapter 2, The War of Teeth. The smoke from Virehold had not yet faded when the first raven left the pyres. It soared east, past the scorched ruins and the bleeding forest line, wings carving through the morning haze like a blade. Ash clung to the wind. The air reeked of burnt parchment, boiled pitch, and the copper sting of bodies left too long in flame. From the hills above, the towers of Virehold lay shattered, its spires like broken fingers clawing at a sky too bright, too cruel. The black wolf banner still fluttered from the main tower's carcass. Torn but defiant, Kael Solmire stood beneath it, armored and hollow-eyed. The morning sun caught the blood dried across his cuirass. He hadn't slept, not since the gate fell, not since the screams started. His face, once angular and lean with the quiet poise of a scholar warrior, now bore the first shadows of something harder. His black hair hung damp at the temples. A healing gash crossed his cheekbone like a brutal accent mark. He looked less like a man and more like a verdict. Virehold had fallen swiftly. That had not been the plan. He hadn't come to destroy it, not truly. He'd come to break its grip, to send a message. But the moment the city gates buckled under the weight of fire and fury, restraint died with them. His soldiers, commoners, outlaws, ex-sellswords, had tasted vengeance, and they had devoured it. Lyria Vire was gone. Whether by blade or cowardice, she had vanished into the labyrinth beneath her own castle, and her blood had not been found. Only her chamberlain, hanging by piano wire in the bell tower, a thorn carved into his forehead with a ritual dagger. Kael hadn't ordered that, and that chilled him more than the winter winds pouring from the high peaks. You can't hold the city, Sir Aemon Pell warned. He stood at Kael's side, helm tucked under his arm, his expression grim. Aemon was older now, silver in his beard and weary behind his storm-blue eyes. But his frame remained thick with muscle, and the long scar across his upper lip, a relic of the battle at Daggerfin, gave his otherwise blunt face an edge of seasoned menace. Kael didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the valley below. Ironvale's riders will already be halfway here, They won't care who lit the fires. Just that it was you. You gave them what they wanted. A cause, Kael murmured. A reason, Aemon corrected. You gave them war. Kael nodded slowly, his breath misting in the chill. Then I'll give them war back. By nightfall, the fires of Virehold could be seen from the cliffs of Emberfast. There, in a keep of glass and steel forged by generations of Ironvale lords, Duke Harrow stood in a velvet robe, sipping wine older than most kingdoms. Harrow Ironvale was a man who never aged in the usual sense. His hair remained the same rich brown it had been 2 decades prior, though his beard had gone salt at the chin. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the posture of a predator at rest, he moved like a nobleman and thought like a banker crossed with a chessmaster. His eyes were his sharpest weapon, hazel green, alive with calculation. A raven perched at the sill, blood on its claws. Harrow read the note once, then again, then handed it to his son without a word. The bastard burns cities now, the boy muttered, eyes wide. He's unhinged. He's useful, Harrow said calmly. A firebrand is never more dangerous than when you let him burn out of sight. Now the nobles will panic. They'll cling to order. And he sipped again. We will give it to them. Behind him, 3 master scribes began drafting declarations. Harrow's seal, a red anvil beneath a hammer poised to strike, was already pressed into fresh wax. Raise taxes, Harrow said. Blame the war. Arrest anyone praising Kael, and send emissaries to Blackthorn, quiet ones. They don't need to kneel. Just stay silent. He smiled thinly. Let the bastard wear his crown of ashes. In the north, Blackthorn keep sat carved into the mountainside like a secret. There were no banners. No horns, only snow. Brannock Blackthorn watched the frost form on the edge of his goblet. He had not spoken in days. Towering, gray-bearded, with the body of a smith and the silence of a tomb, Brannock was a relic of a bloodier age. His presence was a challenge. His voice, when he used it, could quiet a battlefield. His son, Rhaegar, stood beside him, blade across his back, eyes on the storm rolling down the glacier. Rhaegar was leaner, more agile, with raven-black hair tied in a war knot, and a face that bore no expression unless carved into it. He was sharper than his father, and more dangerous in stillness. A war's begun, Rhaegar said. Brannock said nothing. They'll expect us to choose, Duskmoor or Ironvale, the bastard, or the lords, still nothing. Rhaegar's voice lowered. What do you want me to do, father? Brannock turned, his eyes, pale as ice, locked with his son's. Dig. For what? Brannock's lips parted in a whisper. For what the snowberries? Kael rode south with fewer men than he'd arrived with. Those who remained were blood-soaked, silent, changed. He didn't speak to them. He didn't need to. They followed out of fear now, not faith. He hated that. Aemon rode beside him. We can't fight all 5 houses, the knight said. Even if Blackthorn stays out, Ironvale's armies alone could sweep us in a month. You need allies. I need truth, Kael said. I need to know who set fire to the granaries. Who carved that thorn into the chamberlain's head? That wasn't mine. You lost control, Aemon said. Kael looked at him. Or someone took it from me. They camped that night in the ruins of a river village, raised by Vire's tax agents months ago. The bones of barns jutted from the snow like broken ribs. They made no fires. A young scout, barely 16, returned at dawn with news. She had a crooked nose from a childhood fall, and her leathers were too big, rolled at the sleeves. But her eyes were sharp, and she rode fast. A rider from Duskmoor, she panted. He carries a truce banner. Says Lady Visara wishes to speak. Aemon frowned. Now she wants to talk? Kael stood. She smells opportunity. Or your blood, Kael smiled. Then let her come try. Lady Visara Duskmoor did not arrive in armor. She arrived in a carriage carved from obsidian, flanked by riders in gray cloaks and raven feather helms. Her smile had not changed. Tall and striking, Visara moved with a predator's grace. Her hair was dark and intricately braided, coiled around a silver pin shaped like a serpent eating its tail. Her skin was pale as milk glass, but her lips were always the color of dried wine. Her voice never rose, yet it cut through conversation like a knife drawn slow. She stepped from the carriage and nodded once. Lord Kael, I am no lord. Not yet. She looked at the ruins around them. "You've made quite the impression. Say what you came to say." "I offer alliance," Visara said plainly. "Ironvale is moving. They will call for your head. I offer a shield." Kael crossed his arms. "What do you want?" "A war," she said, "but not the one they expect. You draw their fire. I strike their flanks. Together, we break them. Then we rule." Kael stared at her. "Rule what?" Her eyes glittered. "Whatever remains." Far beyond them, north of the wall, a different silence had settled. Not the cold kind, not the hush of snow or distance. This silence breathed. Calreth, the lone ranger of the Northern Watch, had not eaten in days. He wandered the shattered gate of the Frostspire Tower, torch trembling in his grip. The snow was wrong, too warm beneath his boots. The stars had shifted above him, new constellations, old ones forgotten, and the voices, always behind, always near. He reached the edge of the gorge and looked down. Something looked back, eyes that burned without light, a shape that moved without form. Calreth opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came. Back in the Heartlands, the war sharpened its teeth. Kael sent word to the border villages, "Rise or kneel. Choose your banner, join the Thorned Wolf or be swept aside." Ironvale's messengers followed, "Obey or burn. Surrender your fields. Deliver Kael's sympathizers. All debts forgiven, all traitors condemned." The people chose, some out of hope, some out of fear, all out of desperation. And so the kingdom cracked, and from its splinters the War of Teeth began. Chapter 3: Embers and Blood. The alliance was signed in blood and sealed in silence. Kael Solmeyer stood across from Lady Visara Duskmore in a ruined chapel just beyond the smoking borders of Virehold. The stone altar still bore the blackened handprints of townsfolk who had died praying. Light filtered through a shattered window where once a stained glass martyr knelt in triumph. Now broken shards of saints lay underfoot like discarded truth. Neither Kael nor Visara knelt. Instead, they each pricked their fingers on the blade Eamon Pell laid between them. The steel was old enough that even Kael could feel the magic woven into it. Something ancient and bitter, a blade that had tasted oaths before. Blood met steel. The pact was made. "I will draw them out," Kael said. "You will strike from shadow." "I will give you time," Visara replied. "Use it well." Eamon watched with quiet dread. He had seen alliances forged in worse ways. He had seen what followed. Behind them, Visara's steward, a narrow-shouldered man with one silver eye and a face like a collapsed book spine, recorded the pact on parchment scented with foxglove oil. His name was Saren Vane, and he remembered everything. In Emberfast, Ironvale's inner court trembled, not visibly, not to the untrained eye, but behind closed doors the servants gossiped with white lips and darting eyes. Harrow Ironvale no longer held court with calm authority. He held it like a man sitting on a minefield, waiting for a click. His eldest daughter, Lady Alara, had returned from her diplomatic rounds to find the capital under silent siege. Her auburn hair was streaked with snow and travel dust, and her cloak bore the crests of 6 other houses, all watching, all waiting. Alara Ironvale was not like her father. Where Harrow played the long game, Alara played the inevitable one. She believed in force, swift and calculated. "You're bleeding stability," she said as she removed her gloves. "Every village west of the river has declared for the wolf." "He cannot hold them," Harrow replied, sipping wine without pleasure. "They will eat themselves before winter." Alara dropped the gloves on the table. "He doesn't need to hold them. He just needs to keep burning the road behind him. They follow a fire because they're cold, father. They follow him because you've forgotten what the poor dream of." He met her gaze. "And what do you dream of, daughter?" She smiled without warmth. "That when Kael reaches the gates of Emberfast, there's still a city worth defending." Brannock Blackthorn in the frozen north dreamed of older things. His son Rygar returned from a week-long scouting through the ironwood groves with more than frost on his shoulders. He brought back news of grave robbers, not ordinary ones, not men with lanterns and greed. These had burned the bones afterward and left behind a ring of obsidian dust. Brannock did not flinch. He opened the old vault. The door groaned as if in protest. Inside, the air stank of oil, ash, and time. Rows of tomes lined the stone alcoves. Weapons older than kingdoms rested on racks padded with mammoth fur. And there, in the center of the room, on a pedestal of ironwood and bone, lay a mask. Black, featureless, with thin, vertical slits where eyes did not belong. Rygar stared. "Is that what I think it is?" Brannock nodded. It was worn by the last warden of the Pale, before the pact failed, before the breach. Rygar stepped closer. "Why keep it?" His father's voice was low. "Because the cold always comes back." Kael and his soldiers moved east, away from Firehold's bones into lands that had not yet decided. They found villages painted in silence, fields salted by retreating lords, forests where arrows waited in the canopy, and sometimes people, whole families with little but their names and their curses to offer. At first, Kael avoided them. He was no king, no savior. But then came a night when an old woman, blind in one eye, wrapped in rags, pressed a bundle of sage and crushed lavender into his hand. "To ward off demons," she said, "you're walking where the veil thins." She kissed his palm before he could stop her. He didn't sleep that night. The dreams came hard. A city drowned in snow, a tree bleeding from its bark, a face behind glass whispering without lips. When he awoke, Aemon was already packing. "We're being hunted," he said. "And not just by men." Kael stood. "Then it's time we stop running." Lady Visara moved as promised. In the dead of night, her agents struck Ironvale's western caravans. Supply chains disappeared. Garrison commanders found knives in their beds. Minor lords defected quietly, their seals arriving with apologies written in blood. Saren Vane coordinated every move with mechanical precision. He seemed to appear wherever decisions needed whispering, always one step ahead, always too quiet. Rumors began to circulate in taverns and garrisons that the steward was not a man at all, but a ghost of Duskmoor lore returned to settle debts. Visara did not discourage this. In a hamlet called Baron's Reach, Kael's forces encountered resistance. Ironvale men in full plate, supported by mounted archers and a siege wagon. The battle began at dawn. It ended at twilight. Kael did not retreat. He fought at the front, shoulder to shoulder with his captains, blood in his teeth, the thorned wolf standard tied to his back. When the dust cleared, the snow was pink. The village was his, but so was the cost. Aemon took a crossbow bolt through the thigh. A boy no older than 15 died trying to shield his younger brother from fire. Kael buried them both himself. That night, Kael sat alone beneath a broken arch, blood dried on his knuckles, and stared into a fire he did not feel. He whispered a single name, Mother. And somewhere, far to the north, something ancient stirred. It smiled. They came with the snow. It began as a whisper among the Blackthorn watchmen. Unusual silence in the canyons, the animals fleeing south too early, the rivers freezing not from cold but something older. Then came the sound, not heard but felt, a pressure in the chest, a tremor in the teeth. On the third night, a ranger named Vale returned to the gates, alone, frostbitten, eyes wide. She did not speak. Not until Brannock Blackthorn laid a hand on her shoulder and said, "What did you see?" "Not what," she rasped. "Who?" She collapsed before she could say more. Her boots were filled with ash. Her skin smelled of burnt sage. And beneath her coat, etched into the flesh of her chest, was a sigil no one had carved, a circle of teeth surrounding a bleeding eye. Rygar knelt beside her. "Father, we're not ready." "No one is," Brannock said. He stared north. No one ever was. In Emberfast, Alara Ironvale moved her pieces. She met secretly with the commander of the Inner Watch, Sir Dovran, a loyal man, older than her, once a friend of her mother, now the key to turning the blade inward. "The city is ripe for fire," she told him beneath the stone vaults. "My father is bleeding it for power, and the people know it. When Kael reaches the walls, they won't resist, not unless someone gives them another way." Dovran frowned. "You would help the bastard?" "I would stop the madness," she said. "This isn't about Kael. It's about survival. It's about what happens after—" Dovran looked long at her, then nodded once. "I'll ready the gates. You'll need to move fast. I always do." Kael's scouts returned from the east with stories of a fortified bridge, Ironvale's supply chain to the capital. It was a stone monster called Fenrise, lined with ballistae, guarded by 100 men. "Too strong to take," said one captain. Kael said nothing. He stared at the map. Then he looked at Saren Vane. What do you need to bring it down? Vane's silver eye gleamed. A wind shift, a delay, and someone who knows where to cut. 3 days later, Fenrise Bridge collapsed in flame, not from battle, but from within. Vane's agents had bribed the quartermaster, poisoned the watch, and lit the black powder stores beneath the central arch. Kael watched the smoke from a nearby ridge. Your steward is a ghost, Aemon muttered. No, Kael said. He's worse. He's memory. The attack came that night. Not Ironvale's men, not Blackthorn blades. Something else. A howl, long, low, guttural, split the night near their encampment. Kael rose before the echo ended. Aemon was already outside, sword drawn. Shapes moved between the trees. Not quite men, not quite beasts. Eyes glowed like embers, bodies tall and bone-thin, skin gray with hints of frost. They moved without sound, without breath. Their limbs bent wrong. One stepped into the firelight. It wore armor, Ironvale design, but the flesh beneath was desiccated, the face twisted in permanent silence. It raised a blade etched with runes older than the realm. Kael struck first. The creature bled black. Aemon went down hard, slashing as he fell. The others rallied around Kael, fighting like cornered wolves. The creatures did not scream. They did not bleed like men. They retreated only when the sun's first light touched the treetops. Kael stood, sword shaking in his hand. One of the bodies twitched. He moved closer, reached for the helmet, pulled it free. It was a woman, young, familiar, the scout who'd warned them of Duskmoor's messenger. Her throat had been stitched shut. Her eyes opened. She whispered without voice, then turned to ash. By dawn, Kael issued a new order. Any man who speaks of the north in jest will answer to me. Any man who sees shapes in the dark will not be dismissed. Light your fires, sharpen your blades, and never ride alone. He turned to Aemon. They're not just stirring anymore. Aemon grimaced, hand pressed to his bruised ribs. Then what are they? Kael looked north. The beginning. Chapter 4, The Hollow Crown. The capital did not fall in a day. It cracked, it bled, and then it begged. Kael stood atop the ridge above Emberfast, watching the city shimmer in the morning frost. From this distance, it still looked like a jewel. Towers catching the light, red-tiled roofs blanketed in soft white. But he knew what lay beneath the surface: starvation, unrest, rumors of a traitor within the keep, and fear. Fear thick enough to drown in. Beside him, Aemon Pell tightened the strap on his wounded thigh. He moved slower now, each motion with the grim patience of a man who'd lived too long on the edge of blades. You're sure she'll do it? Aemon asked. Kael didn't look away from the city. Alara is more Ironvale than her father. She'll break before she bends. But she knows the cost of silence. She'll open the gates. Behind them, the makeshift army gathered in staggered ranks, ragged but resolute. Their armor was mismatched, their banners stitched from cloaks and scavenged sigils. But their eyes were bright, too bright, desperate with purpose. They didn't follow a king. They followed a man who had given them fire. Inside the walls of Emberfast, the temperature had dropped overnight. Not the cold of weather, but the cold of abandonment, of something unseen pressing in. Alara Ironvale stood at the center of the citadel's war chamber, her gloved hands planted on a table littered with parchments, half-drawn maps, and broken wax seals. Her father sat across from her, wrapped in his crimson cloak, staring at her as if he could rewrite her with his gaze alone. You've undermined the guard, divided the watch, fed unrest. All in the name of what? That bastard's ambition? Her voice did not rise. It never did. I did it because you forgot who you serve, and who you are. I am the Duke of Ironvale. No, she said. You are a man choking on his own crown. A silence settled between them like stone. Then Harrow stood. If you open the gates, I will have you tried for treason. I won't open the gates, she said. I already have. And in that moment, Harrow Ironvale knew two things. His city was lost, and so was his daughter. The gates of Emberfast groaned open just after midday, not from siege engines, not from fire, but from inside. Kael entered not as a conqueror, but as reckoning. He rode through the outer square with 100 silent soldiers at his back. The people watched from behind shutters and crumbling archways. Some bowed, some spat, most simply stared. He saw children wrapped in sheets, old men warming their hands over broken barrels, a girl clutching a doll with one arm, the other in a sling soaked red. He dismounted at the central keep. Alara waited at the base of the stairs, her cloak swept back, her sword belted but unblooded. "You came," she said. "I said I would. You'll need to move fast. Not all within are loyal. Then let's find out who bleeds which color." Inside the throne hall, Harrow had arrayed what was left of his household guard. 40 men, no more. They stood in rigid lines, armor polished, helms down. Harrow stood in front of the throne, not upon it. The red anvil banner hung limply above his head. Kael entered first. He did not draw his sword. Harrow's eyes met his. And in that instant, neither man was royalty, only father and death. "Do you intend to kill me?" Harrow asked. Kael shook his head. "No, I intend to end you." Alara stepped forward. "Father." But Harrow had already moved. He drew a dagger, not at Kael, but at his own throat. Kael lunged. Steel met skin, but too late. The dagger nicked flesh. Blood hit the floor. Harrow collapsed, not dead, but close. He would live, but without title, without crown, and without voice. The blade had taken his words. The city held its breath. Kael did not sit on the throne. He walked past it, to the great hearth at the back of the chamber. He tore down the red anvil banner and cast it into the flames. The crowd, soldiers, spies, commoners alike, watched in silence. He turned. "I am not your king," he said. "I am your consequence," and the city bowed. That night the stars vanished, not behind clouds, not in storm, they simply faded. In the streets, children awoke screaming. Dogs howled at nothing. Candles flickered even in sealed rooms. Kael sat alone in the old solar above the main hall. He felt it before he saw it. A whisper, a tremor in the floorboards, a cold that entered his bones without passing through his skin. And then a voice. "You wear fire well, little wolf." Kael stood, sword drawn, though no one was there. The hearth flared. A shape appeared in the flames. Not man, not beast. A crown of antlers, eyes like voids, skin like cracking coal. The figure did not move. It simply was. And then it vanished. A single word burned into the wall behind the hearth. Hollow. Kael did not sleep that night, because in the north the breach had opened, and what had passed through it no longer remembered death. They called themselves the Hollow Flame. It began as whispers in the alleys, prayers painted in soot beneath broken archways. Then came the masks, iron-veined leather shaped like antlered crowns, and the chants, low, wordless, carried on the breath of ash. At first, Kael ignored them. The city had always birthed its own madness. But then they began appearing at the edge of his speeches, standing silent in the crowds. Some knelt, some wept. All watched him as if he were a prophet already buried. "They worship you," Alara said, her voice caught between disdain and fear. "And not for what you've done, for what they believe you will become. I don't want their worship." "Then you should have stayed in the woods, Kael." Eamon, half limping as he passed through the market streets, found one of them preaching in an abandoned well square. "The wolf bears the fire bears the end births the flame anew. From ruin the shape becomes clear." He burned the banner they'd hung, a black crown etched in chalk. The preacher didn't resist. He simply whispered, "It has already begun." Far in the north, Brannock Blackthorn sat by the pail. He had seen breaches before, in younger years, smaller things, twisted echoes of men, hollow trees that bled. But this was different. The breach was open now, a mouth in the ice, a gate to somewhere older than language. Its edges glowed faint violet in the night, and sometimes shadows spilled from it, long, searching, slow. Rygar stood with his father atop the frost wall, wind in his cloak. "They've sent nothing for days," Rygar said. "They don't need to," Brannock answered. "They know we wait, and they want us to believe that's a mistake. What do we do?" Brannock looked at the breach, and for the first time in 30 years his voice cracked with weight. "We march, now, before it's not a war, but a memory." He sent ravens to Kael that night, not with terms, with a single sentence: "If we do not stand together, we will not stand at all." In Emberfast, Visara Duskmore arrived unannounced. She came cloaked in gray, her guards few, her steward absent. She entered Kael's solar without invitation. "You burned a tyrant," she said. "Now you must choose what kind of shadow you'll cast next." Kael turned to face her. His eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, his hands still blackened from the hearth. "I didn't come to rule." "No," Viserys said. "You came to survive, but you're still breathing, and now the city listens. That makes you dangerous." "To who?" "To me, Kael?" He stepped closer. "Then why haven't you tried to kill me yet?" She smiled. "Because I haven't decided who I need you to be." That same night, someone entered the old dungeons beneath the keep. Unseen. They passed the cells of forgotten traitors and madmen, past the iron-barred vaults of cursed relics, to the final cell, the one sealed in runes. A boy knelt inside, no older than 12, eyes hollow, hair white as chalk, mute and smiling. The visitor unlocked the gate, knelt, and whispered, "The time has come, my prince." The boy stood without speaking, and as he stepped from the cell, frost bloomed across the stones. Kael awoke to the sound of fire bells. The north quarter burned. The hollow flame had lit the granaries, claiming divine vision. Aemon led the suppression, sword in hand, cutting through madness with grim efficiency. But by dawn, 10 were dead, and the message scrawled on the wall above the ashes read, "Crown the flame." Kael stood in the smoke, breath shallow. Elara found him an hour later. "There's a traitor in the court," she said. "Someone close, someone feeding the hollow flame." Kael turned to her and said the name neither of them wanted to believe. Saren Van. To the north, the breach pulsed. To the south, Kael prepared for a reckoning. And above, the stars did not return, only the dark. And in it, a whisper. Hollow King, Burning Crown. Chapter 5, The Tide of Bone. The march began before dawn. Brannock Blackthorn led 600 men south from the Pale, every bootfall grinding frost into stone, every breath steaming in the air like a prayer. No horns, no banners, just the sound of armor shifting beneath furs and the wind gnawing at their backs. Rhaegar rode just behind his father, head uncovered, the cold lashing his face like punishment. He wore no sigil, only a black leather pauldron marked with white chalk, a hastily drawn ring of teeth. The mark had been found burned into the ice 2 nights before. When they scraped it up, the ground hissed. "They've begun to move," Brannock said quietly. "Not scouts, not shadows, hosts." Rhaegar didn't ask who or what. He already knew. Brannock's army didn't march with hope. They marched with resolve, the heavy, bitter kind that settles in the marrow. Their banners remained rolled and hidden, their war drums silent. They were not here to be seen. They were here to outlast. Brannock had fought in 3 wars, seen 2 kings crowned and 1 assassinated. But he had never seen the world bend the way it was bending now. He felt it in the wind, heard it in the ice. The sky was too quiet. The snow was falling without weight. Something beneath their boots stirred, not just earth. Memory. In Emberfast, Kael stood over the remnants of his war council. The long table, once polished alderwood, was now scarred with blades and blood. Only 5 chairs were occupied. The rest sat empty, their owners dead, defected, or vanished. Elara sat to his right, fingers drumming silently. Her hair was pinned high, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. But her voice, when she spoke, was sharp as ever. Aemon leaned against the wall, sword across his knees. He looked more worn than wounded now, his limp permanent, his eyes constantly scanning. He had taken to sleeping in armor. And Saren Vane? Gone. He had disappeared the night before, his quarters empty, his steward's ledgers incinerated, and in the ashes a single rune carved into glass. The same rune etched into the prison floor below. Kael stared at it now, a line of smoke curling in his palm. "It wasn't just a cult," he said. "No," Elara murmured. "It was a plan." Aemon leaned forward. "And the boy? He's the keystone, isn't he?" Kael didn't answer. He didn't need to. Outside, Emberfast was no longer just a city. It had become a crucible. At the western wall of the city, the hollow flame had begun to splinter. Their prophet, masked in antlers and draped in bone-colored silk, called down fire and ice alike in the city square. But half of his followers had turned on him. They claimed he had misread the vision, that Kael was not the flame reborn, that the boy was. They chanted a name no one recognized, Callan. The prophet was torn apart by his own, not ritually, not cleanly, with hands, teeth, nails. When Kael's soldiers arrived, they found the square painted in blood and a single child's drawing pinned to the prophet's chest, a stick figure with a crown of thorns, eyes like stars. The cult fractured. One half fled into the wilds, scattering toward forgotten ruins. The others stayed, silent and smiling, drawing spirals in ash across their arms. "They're not waiting anymore," Eamon muttered. "They're becoming—" Kael walked the square alone that night, lantern in hand, face wrapped in shadow. He watched the ash spiral out across the stone. He watched the blood dry. And for the first time since the breach stirred, he felt something he had sworn not to feel again. Dread. North of the city, Alara led a covert strike into a cave system near the old mines where the cult had been gathering relics. She brought with her 10 of the city's best trackers and a torch marked with runes pulled from the dungeons. The torch sputtered, its flame flickering yellow-green. They found more than bones. They found doors. Massive obsidian slabs half buried in earth, carved in spirals and lined with teeth. No hinges, no seams, but the ground around them pulsed faintly, as if something on the other side was breathing. One of the trackers touched the stone. His body imploded inward. No scream, no blood, just a sharp crack and dust. Alara did not run. She lit the torch and watched the doors recoil from the flame. Behind them something whispered, "He is almost ready." Later, as they left, a second tracker vanished between blinks. When they found him, his eyes had been replaced by black crystals. He whispered only one word before dying: "Hollow." Brannick reached the outskirts of Emberfast by nightfall on the 6th day. Kael rode to meet him alone. No guards, no ceremony, just silence and snow. The 2 men stood within 10 paces, staring across the space where history had bled. "You took a city," Brannick said. "You marched with none," Kael replied. "Some things don't need an army." They clasped wrists. It was not friendship, it was recognition. Kael turned toward the city. "You didn't come just for me." Brannick shook his head. "I came because the world is shifting, and the tide rising has no patience for pride." Kael nodded slowly. "Then let's meet it on our feet." In the deepest chamber beneath the keep, the boy had begun to speak, not with words, with sound, a deep hum that shook the bones of the castle. Candles flickered even in sealed vaults. Mirrors cracked. Ravens abandoned the eaves. Alara descended alone, blade drawn, runed torch in hand. She reached the door. The boy was standing. He turned and smiled. "Do you know me now?" he asked. His voice was not a boy's. It was older than anything alive. She raised her blade. But the blade melted, the torch flickered, and the boy laughed. Not cruelly, but joyfully, as if he had finally come home. He stepped forward. The torches lining the hall died in unison. Alara took 1 step back. "What are you?" The boy's answer was simple, the end of forgetting. Outside, the breach pulsed once, then opened fully, and from it poured the first tide of bone. They did not run. They did not scream. They marched, south, toward the hollow crown, toward the boy, toward the fire Kael had lit. And far above, where stars once watched from behind cold eyes, only silence remained. Because now, the world was remembering. Chapter 6, Night of Crows. The night before the siege, Kael saw the birds return. They came in silence, hundreds of them, black shapes against a steel-gray sky. Crows, mostly, some ravens. Not a single one made a sound. They landed along the walls of Emberfast, on broken spires, on shattered gargoyles, on rusted weather vanes and burned-out bell towers. Watchmen said nothing. Soldiers glanced skyward once, then looked away. The crows did not blink. They simply watched. It was Alara who broke the silence in the war chamber. "They're omens," Eamon scoffed. "They're just birds. They only come when it's too late to turn back." Kael stood at the map table, eyes on the northern ridges where Brannick's scouts had reported movement. "Not omens," he said. "Witnesses." He didn't explain further. He didn't have to. Every soul in Emberfast could feel it, the weight pressing against the horizon, the cold that wasn't weather, the hush that felt like morning. The tide had arrived. Brannick Blackthorn surveyed the field from the forward trenches. The bone march had begun at dusk. Thousands of shapes drifting across the plains, skeletal figures armored in frost-kissed metal, hollow-eyed and relentless. Some carried ancient banners, long faded to ruin. Others bore no insignia at all, just spiral markings carved into their chests. They did not chant. They did not cry out. They simply advanced. Rhaegar stood beside his father, torchlight catching the edge of his drawn blade. "Where's their vanguard?" he asked. Brannick didn't answer. He was watching a cluster of bone walkers kneel beside the wreckage of an abandoned cart. The undead bowed their heads. One pressed its forehead to the frozen earth. The others followed. Prayer. "God save us," Rhaegar whispered. "There are no gods here," Brannick said. In the chamber below the keep, the boy named Callan stood alone. Except he wasn't a boy anymore. His voice had changed. Deeper, colder, not in tone but in presence. When he spoke, light bent, metal groaned, flame dimmed. Alara faced him once more, sword reforged with bloodsteel and etched runes. He smiled when he saw her. "You still think I'm the threat? You opened the breach." "I was born in the breach," Callan said. "I didn't open it. I came through it." Alara raised the blade. Callan took a step forward. The blade hissed. "I am not here to conquer," he said. "I am here to remember. And through me, the world will remember too. What are you remembering, Callan?" He reached out, and behind him, on the wall, the runes flared with violet light. "Your true shape." The battle began with wind. It swept over the outer walls, carrying the scent of rot and snow and memory. Soldiers clutched their blades tighter, torches sputtered, and the crows took flight, all at once. A scream echoed across the plain. One scream, then silence, then the bone host charged. Kael stood atop the southern wall, his cloak snapping behind him. "Signal Brannick," he said. "Now." Below, the horns sounded. The clash was unlike any Kael had ever known. Bone met steel, fire met frost. The dead fell only to rise again, their shattered limbs crawling, dragging broken spears and teeth. Brannick's hammer shattered 3 skulls before breakfast. Rhaegar dragged a boy barely 16 from a collapsing flank. Aemon was everywhere, shouting orders, rallying the failing lines, slashing through enemies that didn't bleed. Kael dropped from the wall into the heart of the chaos, blade drawn, fire blooming from his outstretched hand. He had not called it. It had simply come. Callan's fire. His eyes burned violet. The dead recoiled. And then they bowed. Behind the front, Saren Vane returned. He walked through the eastern gate with a dozen figures clad in crimson robes, spiral-marked. The hollow flame reborn. The guards did not stop him. They simply fell. Vane ascended the keep's central tower, Kael's old command post. He looked down at the battle and whispered, "Now." From the tower's spire, a flare of light exploded. The breach opened wider, and from it came voices, millions of them, singing, not in joy, but in grief. The eastern wall fell first. It didn't crumble. It shattered. Not from siege engines, but from something unseen. A pulse of energy, pure and violet, that struck the base of the tower and split the stone like dry wood. Soldiers were thrown like rag dolls. Light flashed, then twisted. The sky folded inward for 3 heartbeats before snapping back with a thunderclap that left the air smelling of burnt ink and salt. Kael felt it even before he saw it. The breach was no longer just open, it was alive. Aemon reached him, blood on his face, his left arm hanging limp. "We've lost the gate." Kael nodded once. "Pull back to the inner ring. Seal the north stair. Keep the boy guarded." Aemon hesitated. "You think they're after him?" "I think they remember him." Alara stormed the tower. Her boots echoed up the spiral steps, her sword glowing faintly with runes that pulsed like veins beneath skin. She passed corpses. Guards she knew, men who had trained under her, throats carved in spirals, eyes burned out. Saren Vane stood at the top, waiting. He no longer looked like a steward. He wore robes of flame-kissed silk, eyes burning with something older than hatred. Power swirled around him, a distortion of form, like heat above the desert. "You never understood," he said softly. "Then explain it to me," Alara growled, sword raised. "We were never meant to be separate. The breach isn't a crack, it's a memory of what the world used to be, the gods you forgot, the truth you buried." You betrayed us. I freed us. They fought, magic against steel, fire against blood. The tower shook. The sky cracked open. Lightning surged through the walls like veins. Alara bled. Vein burned. In the end, it wasn't her sword that struck the final blow. It was the fall. He tumbled from the tower window, burning, twisting, laughing, and when he hit the ground, he shattered, like glass. Kael found Callan kneeling in the temple ruins. Around him, the fire burned without heat. They think I'm their weapon, Callan said, not turning. They think I'm your end. What are you really? Kael asked. Callan looked up. For a moment, his eyes were just eyes. I am what's left when you erase the gods. Kael lowered his sword. Then help us. Not them, Callan stood. If I do, I can't go back. There's nothing to go back to. They walked out together. The city still burned. The crows still circled. But something new had begun. The tide had faltered. For the first time, the dead stopped. The breach pulsed, and from it came not more warriors, but a voice. Kael fell to one knee. So did Callan. And the voice said a single word. Next, Chapter 7, Thrones of Ash. The city burned for 3 days. Not from siege, not from war, but from memory. The fires began where the breach had pulsed last, near the temple district, in the old stone atriums where no flame had touched in centuries. They rose without smoke, without heat, violet and white, flickering like candlelight underwater, and wherever they touched stone, the stone wept. Kael stood on the shattered battlements of the western wall, staring out over a kingdom he no longer recognized. Emberfast towers, once proud and defiant, were now crowned in ember glow. Streets flooded with refugees moved like veins through a body in collapse. The dead were gone, just gone. The tide had stopped as if someone had called them home, but the silence they left behind was worse than the screaming. Callan hadn't spoken since the voice. Not to Kael, not to Alara, not to the guards who stood watch over him day and night, 2 at a time, never blinking, hands always on hilts. He sat cross-legged in the high garden beneath the ruins of the crown tree, hands resting in his lap. Birds didn't come near him, shadows bent oddly around his shoulders, and the grass beneath him had stopped growing. Alara approached at dusk, wrapped in boiled leather and dirt-streaked armor. She looked thinner, angrier. You're going to have to say something eventually. Callan looked up, and in that moment, Alara saw not a child, but a shape barely contained by skin. I remember now, he said. Remember what? His voice was soft, what it felt like to fall, not through sky, but through time. Below the keep, Kael sat in the council chamber alone. He had not slept. Not since Vane's death. Not since the word next. His sword lay across the map table, still scorched from breach fire. Around it, marked with soot and blood, were the last standing bastions of the realm, Thornwatch, Greymere, the River Conclave, the scattered remnants of the old order. None had answered his ravens. Aemon entered, limping heavily. He dropped a pouch on the table. What's that? Kael asked without turning. From the temple of the first flame, found it buried beneath the altar. Hidden, locked in black steel, Kael opened it. Inside, a ring, twisted silver, shaped like a serpent swallowing a sun. He stared. I've seen this before. Aemon's voice was gravel. So have I. My father wore one. Said it belonged to the kings who came before the flame. Kael picked it up. It burned cold. North of the breach, Brannock Blackthorn stood on blackened ice. His army, what remained of it, was silent behind him. Only half had survived the night the tide vanished. Some had simply stopped breathing. Others had woken changed, eyes like smoke, memories that didn't belong to them. Brannock had not slept. He had watched the stars return, wrong, rearranged, as if the sky had remembered something older than astronomy. Rygar rode up behind him. Should we press south? Brannock didn't answer at first. Then, we should burn what we can before it starts walking again. Back in Emberfast, people had begun to worship. Not Callan, not Kael, not the breach. The ashes. In alleys and shattered shrines they drew spirals, lit violet candles, cut small wounds into their palms and whispered thanks for being spared. They called it the gift of stillness. Kael watched one such ritual from a rooftop, unseen. A boy no older than 10 sliced his palm and pressed it against stone. The stone glowed briefly. The blood vanished. A woman wept with joy. Behind Kael, Alara spoke. They're not afraid anymore. They should be terrified. Kael closed his eyes. We all should. At midnight, Callan stood. He walked barefoot through the halls of the keep. No one stopped him. They only watched. He entered the throne room and sat, not on the throne, on the floor before it. He bowed his head and began to hum. The floor cracked beneath him. From deep below, something answered. A low, rising sound, like chains uncoiling, like wings stretching, like breath held too long finally released. And the breach shuddered. Kael woke the next morning to screaming. He raced to the gates. Beyond the walls, nothing moved, except the sky. It had turned black, not storm black, not night black, hollow black. Shapes swam in it, towering, crowned in smoke, eyes the size of citadels. Callan stood on the parapet. They're not here for war, he said quietly. What are they here for? Kael asked. To witness. Alara came to him that night, her face pale, her armor bloodied. They found another gate, she said, buried beneath the river. How many more? Callan looked up. As many as we forgot. Kael placed the ring on his finger. It didn't burn anymore. It fit perfectly. The breach opened wide, wider than ever before, and from it came not death, but truth. Chapter 8. The Memory War. The world ended quietly, not with fire, not with thunder, but with a slow exhale, as if the realm had finally grown tired of forgetting. Kael stood atop the tower of Emberfast as the last stars blinked out. Below him, the city held its breath. Fires no longer burned. Bells no longer rang. The people waited, not for rescue, not even for doom. They waited for understanding. And across the plains, beyond the gates and rivers and frost-wilted fields, the breach had opened fully. It was no longer a wound. It was a mirror. Callan no longer looked like a boy. He moved through the keep as if it remembered him. Doors opened without touch. Walls pulsed faintly with violet warmth as he passed. Wherever he walked, silence followed. Not reverent silence. Expectant. He stood now before Kael, barefoot, eyes steady. I know what I am, Callan said. I know what you are too. Kael's voice came low. Then say it. Callan lifted a hand and touched the ring on Kael's finger. You are the bearer of what we broke. The last name in the first tongue. The flame that forgets itself until called. Kael didn't flinch. What do I do? You choose. What is the choice? To remember, or to survive. Brannock Blackthorn arrived at the gates of Emberfast with only 60 men. He did not bring siege engines. He brought truth. He dismounted alone and walked through the open gates. The guards did not stop him. They bowed. Kael met him in the square. Brannock handed him a shard of obsidian. We found it buried beneath Greymere, under the old well. Kael turned the shard over. Spiral markings, symbols of binding. It was part of a name, Brannock said. Kael nodded. And the rest? Scattered, sealed, hidden in every major city, every gate, every breach. Each one isn't just an opening, it's a sentence. A sentence to what? To remember what we killed. Alara led the descent. Beneath the river, the second gate had bloomed like a black flower. It pulsed with sound. Music and mourning fused into one. Her blade, reforged in blood steel, trembled as she approached. A figure waited at the base of the steps. Female, ancient, clad in robes of woven breath and bone. I remember you, the figure said. You were the last one who didn't kneel. Alara didn't speak. The figure raised a single finger. And so you must choose who dies first. She pointed upward. To save your world, you must kill your king. Alara returned to the surface changed, not shaken, not afraid, but resolved. She carried the weight of the gate's truth in her marrow. And when she looked at Kael, her eyes said she might do what had to be done. That night Kael dreamed. He saw a sky of spirals, a battlefield that stretched into forever, a throne made of the bones of gods. He saw empires fall, not to blade or flame, but to memory reclaimed. He saw himself sitting there, alone. He awoke with ash on his lips. Callan waited in the doorway. The gates are aligning. When they do, the sentence will finish. Kael stood. And then the world will remember everything. Is that the end? Callan shook his head. It's the beginning of the truth. The breach cracked open one final time. Every gate across Vaelrath pulsed in harmony. Spirals carved into mountains lit like veins. Cities echoed with forgotten voices. Storms split the sea. Trees bent toward the sky and whispered names no tongue had spoken in 10,000 years. Kael stood in the heart of the temple square, surrounded by what remained of the world. Aemon, sword drawn. Brannick, cloak tattered. Alara, blade at her hip, her eyes locked on Kael's throat. Callan, smiling. Above them, the voice returned. Choose. Kael turned to Callan. You knew this was coming. I am what's coming. And if I kill you... Callan spread his arms. Then we go back to sleep. The breach closes, the pain ends, and if I let you live, then everyone remembers, every death, every sin, every silence. The crowd that had gathered behind him, thousands of them, waited. Some bowed, others watched, none ran. Kael drew his sword. Callan knelt, the blade hovered. And Kael said, No more forgetting. He dropped the blade and took Callan's hand. The breach did not close, it widened, once, and then folded inward, into Kael. The ring melted into his skin. The symbols lit across his spine. His voice changed, not louder, deeper, older. And when he spoke again, it was not a command. It was a name. The world shuddered. The gates collapsed. The sky wept light. And all across Vaelrath, the people remembered. In the ashes of Emberfest, a new throne was raised. Not of gold, of stone and blood and memory. Kael sat upon it. Callan stood at his side. Alara guarded the stairs. Brannick watched the horizon. Aemon sharpened the blade. And somewhere in the dark something smiled. Because remembering was only the beginning. Thank you for listening and watching. Please like, share, and comment if you would like a book too. And as always, please subscribe if you would like more stories.